Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on managing frustration and anxiety and teaching social skills. My name is Vincent Myers, and I'm the Communications and Outreach Specialist for Spark. We're so glad that you could join us, and we thank you for taking the time to participate in the Spark community. Spark's mission is to build a research community of tens of thousands of individuals with autism and their families, who will be asked to register online and share genetic information via saliva kits sent to the home. These data are shared with Spark researchers and will power important new research that aims to advance the understanding of autism and provide meaningful information and resources to participants. Before we begin, I'd like to say just a couple of words about how today's webinar will work, in case you've never attended an online meeting before. Today's presentation will be shown in a window on your computer, and the sound will come through your computer speakers. If you're having trouble hearing the presentation, please call the phone number at the top of the presentation browser window. We are recording this webinar and will post it on the Spark website so it can be viewed at a later date. Please be aware that in order to minimize disruptions, all audio except the presenters will be muted for the duration of the webinar. If you speak, we will not be able to hear you. However, you can use the chat box at the left of your screen to ask questions, either technical or for the presenter, and only the leaders of the webinar will be able to read them. Near the end of the webinar, we will leave time for a question and answer session, which will draw directly from your questions in the chat or sent to us via email. Please note that the speaker is not able to provide advice regarding your child specifically, but he is happy to answer other topical questions. We'll also be holding webinars monthly on a range of topics, so questions on those topics can be addressed at those times. I think that's all of the webinar information I have for you, so I'll pass it off to Amy Daniels, Project Manager for Spark, to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Vincent. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining today. My name is Amy Daniels, Project Manager for Spark here at the Simons Foundation. We are very privileged to have Dr. Jed Baker speaking with us today. Dr. Baker is the Director of the Social Skills Training Project, a private organization that serves individuals with autism and social communication problems. He is on the professional advisory board of a variety of autism organizations, and in addition, he writes, lectures, and provides training internationally on the topic of social skills training and managing challenging behaviors. He is an award-winning author of 9 books, including one of his most recent called Overcoming Anxiety in Children and Teens, published in 2015. His work has also been featured on ABC World News, Nightline, the CBS Early Show, and the Discovery Health Channel. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Baker for today's talk and thank him for being able to share this important information with our Spark community.
Well, thank you for having me. My plan today is to give you about 20-25 minutes of what normally is a full-day workshop, so I'm just narrowing it down to the nitty-gritty here, and then give you some time to ask some questions, which I think is maybe more important. So I am talking about managing these moments of frustration and anxiety and teaching social skills. They overlap any challenging behavior, trying to teach folks a better way to get what they need. So we're always talking about teaching skills when we're dealing with challenging behaviors. So let's look at this first slide. There's some interesting research, about how we understand these moments when our clients and our kids and our students have these challenging behaviors. All of us have been in a position, especially if you're a parent, but a teacher as well, where we can make things worse or we can make it better. And sometimes we'll see things as a discipline issue, and that can work fine, but sometimes when we see things as a discipline issue, when someone's having a meltdown or they really lack the skills to handle the situation, we go down that traditional discipline road, we can really escalate things and make it, in fact, worse. So when we have the right understanding, we're able to manage ourselves a little bit better. And so we need to talk a little bit about that first, how we think about things to manage our own emotions so that we can think about how to solve the problem and not just react emotionally. When we react emotionally, take things personally, we often escalate things as well. I want to talk to you about how to de-escalate crises with your kids and students or young adults, whoever you're working with. Really the art of distraction we're going to talk about, self-regulation. But we don't want to just put out fires after the fact. We really want to talk about setting up prevention plans, how we get ahead of challenging behaviors if we understand what triggers them, so we don't just react, but we prevent. So let me talk a little bit about what might be happening at these moments of really difficult behavior with our kids, our clients, and so forth. Well, this issue of low frustration tolerance. Some people get upset very easily, and you don't have to have any kind of disability to get upset easily. Like any of us who are tired or exhausted, we're going to be more prone to having these emotional issues. And it's related to these sort of two parts of the brain, the limbic system and the forebrain. And I like to call them the Incredible Hulk and Dr. Banner, based on the Marvel comics. You know, the Incredible Hulk, the limbic system, controls our emotions, and especially our fight, flight, or freeze response when we're threatened. You know, we're sufficiently threatened. That limbic system, often called the reptilian brain, that's the picture of the alligator there, you know, can sort of hijack the rest of the brain and just get us into, you know, fighting if we need to, running away if we have to, or just sort of freezing, just sort of being overcome with anxiety, depression, hiding out till the coast is clear. That limbic system works really well when we're exhausted. We can still sort of manage to survive. But the forebrain, that's the part of the brain, that's Dr. Banner. That's the scientist, the part of our brain that sort of reasons and plans. That's the part that falls asleep. And so when you're sufficiently threatened, people can get into this sort of limbic system mode, the Incredible Hulk mode, which is sort of the problems we see when our clients and our kids are significantly anxious or frustrated. They may not have access to their logic brain in that moment. And if someone's given them a diagnosis of ADHD or bipolar disorder, intermittent explosive disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, someone's saying they're having trouble controlling that limbic system. So, you know, we're prone to this too. We can have our own sort of Incredible Hulk mode and not sort of think through things. How do we manage our own feelings? That's where things need to start. So there's some interesting research, particularly related to a former supervisor, colleague of mine, Mark Durand. Did some very interesting research on how parents think about challenging behavior can lead to better outcome. And he talks about something called attributional style, which is how we think, how we explain a difficult event, how we explain an event. One of the first things he shows us that when parents have hope that things will get better, they get better outcomes. So the moment your kid has a challenging behavior, if we can think to ourselves, this is temporary, not stable. This is something that will improve. We're going to get better outcome. If we see it as, this is a forever thing, never going to get better, we stop progressing. The other issue is that we see it as a specific problem, not sort of a global character flaw. Like a kid who couldn't wait for something and has a meltdown because you didn't give them access to the iPad. Can we see that as a specific problem? The youngster doesn't yet know how to wait, or didn't comprehend how long he'd have to wait, rather than, this is just a bad kid. So once again, temporary, not stable, specific, not global. These are the ways that we need to think when that difficult behavior occurs. And then the last sort of issue of attributional style is to see it as an external problem, not an internal problem. What we mean by an internal problem is when we blame the kid, blame the parent, blame the teacher, blame somebody. Yet sometimes when it rains, it's nobody's fault. But yet we can all figure out how to get a raincoat on. When we stop blaming people, what we mean by an external problem is we think of this difficult behavior as there's a problem with the gap between the demands we're placing on that kid and their skills to handle it. And we have to close that gap by either modifying those demands or improving their skills. So I say all that because this is the frame of mind we want to have every time there's that difficult behavior, so we don't lose it. We understand, hey, there's hope, this is temporary, it's a specific issue, and it's nobody's fault. There's a gap between the demands and the child's skills. And now we frame things as a solvable problem. What do we do in the throes of a meltdown? So look, traditional discipline where we have rewards or consequences can work for lots of kids. But it's not going to work in the throes of a meltdown when logic isn't there. A kid doesn't care about rewards or consequences when the forebrain isn't there. If you try to punish the Incredible Hulk, it will escalate. Right? You could punish Dr. Banner; he's logical, but not the Incredible Hulk. And I say 30% of kids this traditional discipline may only escalate things. And what I mean by that is lots of our kids have autism spectrum disorders, ADHD, learning disabilities, and those kids don't just learn from rewards and consequences. They need us to modify the demands we place on them and teach them some skills. So what do we do in the throes of an incredible Hulk meltdown moment? Severe anxiety, severe frustration. When logic is gone, we think of distracting. And what distraction is, for me, three sort of categories I think of. Novel items, things they've never seen before, like I might have all of a sudden a gold coin from Canada in the middle of a kid's meltdown. Hey, is this valuable? Did you see this before? I'm not telling them, hey, you're out of control. Come look at this coin to get calm. I'm just showing them the coin to get their mind off of it. Maybe there's a special interest that could serve as a way to regulate again, to distract them, such as maybe they love Disney, so we read a Disney magazine together. Or maybe there's a sensory activity like bouncing on a ball or feeling a fan blow in your face or listening to music or some mindful meditation guide that they have on an app for free on their iPhone, something that allows them, to calm again, okay? So this is a crisis tool. And it's a great thing to do when kids are melting down to, rather than punish, to regulate and soothe them. It's not going to be the greatest thing to do in the world when a youngster is trying to avoid a task, because then if you do distraction, you're letting them avoid that task. They won't do a classwork or homework assignment and you all of a sudden bring out your Pokemon cards to distract them. They might learn that's a great way to get out of work. So when someone's trying to avoid a task, we still want to regulate them, but we can give them a better way to take a break rather than tantruming, like ask for a break. Or we can minimize the work. So if you have 5 sentences to write, let's just write 2, and then we'll take a break. This sort of begs the question, what do we do with repeat problems, like when somebody doesn't want to do work? Right? We don't want to just put a fire out after the fact by distracting them. When someone has a repeat problem, we want to understand why it happens. So behaviorists have a fancy term for this called a functional behavioral assessment, where they're really trying to understand the context, what sets up the problem, how do people respond to the problem. I really focus on the triggers when I try to understand why a problem happens, because the triggers are going to be rich with the information you need to figure out how to not have that problem again, how to set things up differently, what to teach that child to get ready for. So I'm going to give you a list of triggers, and when we know the trigger, we have a better way to prevent the problem. I'll just mention I have this app. My No More Meltdown book was created into an app, and that allows people to sort of keep track of challenging behavior in real time on their iPhone, and then it will analyze the data for you and tell you what might have been the trigger, and if we know the trigger, how do we create a good prevention plan. Let's look at these typical triggers. So internal issues are things like a kid's not feeling well, or it could be an internal psychological issue like grief or loss. There's been a change in the family dynamics, or somebody's died, or a divorce is going on. The reason I talk about internal issues and why you think that might be an issue sometimes is if you see an increase in problematic behavior across settings and across time. Seems like that kid is bringing more problems with them everywhere they go. So then you want to look at, hey, is this kid not feeling well? Do they need to see a doctor? Should we call teacher, the parent, and meet with each other to find out if there's something that's not right about where that youngster is currently. Sensory issues can be another trigger, right? So lots of our students could be overwhelmed by too much stimulation, and some are underwhelmed. They get bored easily. They need lots of stimulation. Folks with severe ADHD, can't sit and listen to a webinar like this. They need to get up, move around, have hands-on activities. Another one is lack of structure, which is often lack of visual supports. If they're in a setting like recess, where there are not a lot of visual supports to explain where to go, or what to do, you can see challenging behavior. So we often scan that environment for were there enough visual supports to make clear what was expected for that kid. Often the case in classroom settings for kids with language-based problems. Most kids with autism may have some language processing issues, and if all the teacher's doing is talking at them, there's not enough visual support, there's going to be a problem. Challenging work, fears, and phobia. So another trigger is where there's a situation like class work that's new or different or elicits fear, or it could be other kinds of fears and phobias like fear of insects, so they won't go out and play, or OCD, fear of germs, or social phobia, social anxiety. So many of our kids, have that. Having to wait, not get what you want, dealing with a disappointment is another category of triggers, right? So I look at these sort of triggers as categories. And when parents tell me they're having an issue with their kid, I look for, does it fall into one of these categories of triggers? Like when a kid didn't get what they wanted immediately, or couldn't have what they wanted at all, they had to accept no, or there was a change in their schedule or routine. Okay? Next one is threats to self-esteem. I often call them shame-based triggers, like dealing with losing, mistakes, or dealing with criticism. So I'll show you some prevention plans for that. And the last is unmet wishes for attention, when kids don't get the attention they want, and that's when the problem occurs. So if you know the trigger, this is the sort of components of a good behavior plan. Number 1 and number 2 are the main things here, to alter the trigger and teach a better way to deal with that trigger. Then you can think about rewards, maybe losses, but not if somebody's already on fire. I try to steer away from that when somebody's already upset. Let's talk about one of the first triggers, difficult work. So many ways to modify challenging work. But I want to give you just a general map of the territory. A lot of times we don't really explain fully what is involved in a classwork or homework. And a child experiences frustration early on. They couldn't do something. So we might even say, hey, here's how to do this problem, or here's how to do this writing. You go ahead and do it. If you need help, just ask. Well, by the time they need help, it may be way too late. As soon as they experience frustration, they just want to quit, and it's over, and they're not going to do it again. And now they have a little PTSD to that kind of work. If they see it again, or they hear, oh, we're going to do math, they run away, right? So one of the ways to avoid that is to teach everything first, to create like errorless learning. Show them all that they need to know for the first 3 or 4 problems that you're going to do, so they get everything right and begin to feel confident. Then they might be able to tolerate not knowing something and asking for help. You have to create confidence first. Call that the 80-20 rule. Go over 80% of what they can do totally, errorless learning, show them what to do before the 20% that's difficult. I'm going to skip explain growth mindset for just a second. I'll come back to it. We need to visually support any language. So lots of good inclusion classes might have one teacher telling the story, the other teachers acting it out, or have a story web up on the board to make it clear and more comprehensible. Lots of kids with attention issues, they're just not going to do work if they see too much of it. So instead of showing 9 problems, we show 1 problem to do, we take a break. Then another problem, take a break. Let me go back to explain the growth mindset, because this is a crucial issue for so many of our particularly high-functioning students on the spectrum. Carol Dweck has done some very important research on ways kids can think about their abilities like intelligence that affects whether they'll stay motivated or not. She talks about having a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. The fixed mindset, not the way to go, is the idea that your intelligence is fixed, it's unchanging. You're just born with a certain brain that doesn't change really, certain IQ. And you don't want people to think you're dumb, so you're going to pick easy work to do that demonstrates that you know what to do. You don't want to make a mistake in front of everybody. In fact, if you make a mistake, you lose motivation because somehow it says, don't have a good enough brain if it's a fixed mindset, right? And you don't want to accept help, especially special ed help, because somehow that says you're not good enough, competent enough. And people like that have lower learning outcomes. They're not trying difficult tasks. They're unwilling to make a mistake, unwilling to get help. But if you have a growth mindset, the idea of a growth mindset is that your brain changes with time. You learn things over time. And the only way to learn new things is by trying something that's a little hard, things you don't know how to do, and that you probably will make a mistake with. And if you learn from that mistake by accepting help, that's how you get smarter. And people like that have higher learning outcomes. The point of this is that parents and teachers, especially with our high-functioning kids with autism, really, and any kid with a learning disability, we need to really teach them to grow, to have this growth mindset. So coming back to what we teach, we try to teach them the issue of growth, trying when it's hard, that we're not interested. whether they get their work right or wrong. That's not very interesting. That just tells you what you know right now. The issue is, can you try it? Can you ask for help if you need it? Can you ask to watch first? Can you ask to take a break, to relax and come back? Can you negotiate? I'll do this if you help me with this. So we're going to reward effort, not outcome, the idea of growth, not what you know right now. And so teachers and parents have to work very hard. That Carol Dweck tells us the key to success, our willingness to keep trying and ask for help if you're stuck. That's the key. And so many of our kids refuse to ask for help because they're embarrassed, and we really have to overcome that. And then we reward them for asking for help. We reward them for effort and not outcome. You might have a trying when it's hard poster. They get points every time they ask for help or ask to watch first. They don't get points for getting the work right or wrong, just for the effort. Let's talk about anxiety, other anxieties. So I wrote this book that kind of talks about ways to handle a variety of anxiety issues. So rather than go over all of that, I'm just giving you a general map of the territory. You have to win somebody over to working on their anxiety. People don't like to face their fears. So you got to talk about their talents and their ability and all that they can do in life to give them that hopeful view. And that's why we want to just sort of reduce that anxiety so it doesn't get in their way. We try to explain to them about that Incredible Hulk alarm system, but that sometimes you have false alarms. That sometimes when you have that sort of fear that something's going to happen, but there is no actual danger out there. We call that a false alarm. The only way you know it's a false alarm is if you gradually face it. And so we talk about creating fear ladders with kids, from the least fear to the bigger fear. So, if a kid was afraid to, maybe they have selective mutism, afraid to talk in front of other people, we might put this facing the fears on a little ladder where we'd say, well, just nod yes or no as the first rung on the ladder. Whisper to a friend who can talk to the teacher for you. That's the second rung on the ladder. Whisper to the teacher. That's the third rung, and so on. And then we would reward them for facing every fear on the ladder. And we also might use some cognitive behavior therapy. We'd call it think like a scientist to help challenge their worries. And we create these little think like a scientist cue cards to help them challenge those worries so they'll face their fears on the fear ladder. So we can talk more about it in Q&A if people have questions. And then we could look about adding exercise and mindfulness meditation, other relaxation strategies to bring down anxiety so they can gradually face fears. And sometimes we look at biological interventions like feedback or medication that may also bring down that anxiety enough to begin to face fears. So let's talk about another trigger here, waiting and accepting now. The best thing we can do to help, particularly kids who don't have a lot of language, is we've got to use visual timers, visual schedules to help them know when they can have what they want. Because if you say to somebody, oh, you can have it in 5 minutes, or you can have it at 1 o'clock, the kids don't know what that is. But if they can see a visual timer shrinking, they can see the time passing, then it's easier to wait. They know it. They can stop a video game and go have dinner and come back if they know when they can come back to the video game. So if you put a special interest on a schedule, it's easier for them to stop something because they know when they can go back. Okay? When it comes to accepting no, they've got to know, we've got to teach them that if they don't get one thing, there's always something else to look forward to. We always have to give that sort of light at the end of the tunnel for them. And sometimes we create a disappointment poster with certain kids where if they don't get what they want but they're calm about it, we give them a point on the disappointment poster, and a couple more points they get to go to the school store, or the family will give them a reward. So there's always a silver lining for accepting no. Dealing with mistakes, dealing with losing, let's talk about that. Kids who are perfectionists can't tolerate that, but we can put them on a little behavior chart where we're going to reward them for handling a mistake or losing a game. So they'll get more points for handling a mistake or losing a game than they would if they won the game or they got the work right the first time. Because we're saying to them that making a mistake is what you need to do to learn. Losing a game and being a good sport helps you to be friends. And if you can do that, you get more points. So we reward handling imperfection more than we reward being perfect. Right? Teasing is another threat to self-esteem, and so we need to protect them from teasing. So we talk about creating peer buddy programs. But we also need to give them a way to sort of a protocol for how to handle teasing. So our books, we talk about lots of things people can think and say in response to teasing as a way to handle it. Unmet needs for attention. Well, lots of kids need our attention constantly, so sometimes we just schedule it. Schedule one-on-one time with them. It's easier for them to not get your attention if they know in a schedule when they're going to have your undivided one-on-one attention. Sometimes we use red-green cards as a visual aid to show them green light means I'm open, you can come to me now. Red light, and then maybe I'm on the telephone, this is not a time. The red light, okay? Lots of our kids get attention in really provocative ways sometimes. They learn just the choice words. I had a kid who would go to the airport and say, I have a bomb. That's not a great way to get attention. He said lots of provocative things. This is a kid, you put him in the theater, and although there's not a ton of research on this, but I would say anecdotally, a lot of the kids are really provocative. If I've given them a legitimate outlet in the theater to do that, they do very well. So I've had kids who are cutting up all during, say, class time, and I'd say, we got to do 3 math problems, and then I'm going to give you some stand-up comedian time. And if they know they're going to get that stand-up time, often they can keep it together from our lesson. Sometimes what we do is we teach good ways and not so great ways to get attention. This was a kid who would say really embarrassing stuff in public, like, he would go around his high school asking people, like, are you a virgin? Or go to the airport, I have a bomb, or walking up to strangers and saying, what race are you? What religion are you? Well, this was getting into trouble. So what we did is we put a public-private card together and told them on the public side, here's what you can say in public. On the private side, these are sensitive topics you can only talk about in private. Okay? And so this little card helped them to know what were okay and not okay topics to get attention in good ways. We also put them on a response clock system because this was not a kid who was dysregulated with negative emotions. This was a kid dysregulated with positive, pleasure-seeking emotions. So he wasn't really the Incredible Hulk. He was just a little out of control with positive emotions. So we could say to him, if you say any of those sensitive topics, you get a warning, and then you'll lose a snack, and then you'll lose increments of watching The Simpsons at home. I'm not recommending you use punishment systems, but if you're ever considering it, more open to it when somebody's dysregulated with positive emotion, not negative emotion. Self-stim, talk briefly about that. So, look, everyone's entitled to the environment that works for them. Whatever they need to do to regulate themselves, whatever environment works that's quiet enough or stimulating enough. When you see lots of self-stim behavior, we often see that. Sometimes it means we're not instructing them in a way that's engaging. So if you have less verbal kids, that's often when you see increased hand flapping or scripting SpongeBob episodes or something, because they're not really understanding what we're saying, and we might have to provide more visual supports, more hands-on activities to engage them again. From a skill point of view, I just want our kids to be good self-advocates. So they need to be able to say what kind of environment they need, and if they can't because they don't have the verbal skills, maybe there is a cue card that's on their organizer. So even a substitute teacher sees, oh, Johnny has noise issues. We don't put him in the hallway till everybody's already switched classes. So some way for them to advocate for themselves. Last but not least in terms of triggers is dealing with unexpected triggers. So I like to create relaxation folders with kids that shows the types of activities, either in picture format or words if they read, the kinds of things that are relaxing for them, whether it's playing with Legos or listening to a mindfulness meditation app or exercise, whatever it is. And so what we're trying to show them in the morning is, here's a picture of you upset, here's you doing the activity that's calming, and here's you with your safety people, the people you trust at home or in the school to help you solve the problem. And we try to prepare them that whatever happens today, this is what you can do to calm yourself. And if you're a verbal kid, we add this important self-talk. All problems can be solved, or at least greatly resolved, if you can wait and talk to the right person. So we tell that kid every day, whatever happens, as challenging as it might be, I'll make it better for you. But you might have to I may not be there when it happens. Can you wait for me? Can you wait 5 minutes? Can you wait till the end of the day? We're trying to give that kid that understanding that no matter what unexpected, terrible thing happens, we'll make it better. And if they have that hope that things will get better because they have a trusting relationship, they're often willing to control that temper. The Incredible Hulk knows that there's someone coming to fix this, and then he can relax or she can relax. Okay? So we'll go over those relaxation folders every morning with certain kids. All right, quick change of scenery here. I'm going to talk about how we support kids in terms of social skills training. I'm just going to talk in the context of a school for a moment, but all of this can be done at home too. But I just want to talk about how schools work for a moment. Schools do things on a tiered approach. Tier 1 is what a whole school does for every student in the school, like making sure everybody's respectful to each other. They have good anti-bullying programs, create good inclusion environments, right? Train their staff. Tier 2 is when you have kids who still are having social skill trouble, so we go to special ed support experts and ask, what can we do for this youngster who may not yet have a IEP or a 504 plan. Tier 3 is when you have a kid who has an IEP or a 504 plan, and we need to be very specific about what skills we're working on and how we're going to improve their social skills. And I want to just show you what I see as the key components of Tier 3. So this is for parents and teachers. How do we support social skills training? There are certain key components that need to be considered. You have to target relevant skills. We can't teach everything, okay? And the way I target relevant skills is to think, what is this kid doing too much of or too little of on a daily basis that interferes with social functioning? You know, we're not looking at 75 skills here. We're looking at maybe the 3 or 5 issues on a daily basis that interferes, too much, too little. We need to establish motivation to socialize. So let's say one of the things we've identified is helping the kid to join into play. Well, unless he's motivated to join in, it doesn't matter that we all targeted the skill join into play. How do we make join into play motivating? We can use an external reward, join into play, and you get a reward, or an intrinsic reward, like let's just make the play more interesting. Maybe you don't want to play tag with other kids, but maybe you are obsessed with animals, so we're going to play the animal guessing game, and all of a sudden now the kid wants to play with other kids. We need to teach the skill, and the way we teach is based on a child's language. So I don't think I'm going to have time to show you all the different ways to teach, but I have some slides on this in this packet. But we have to use more visual supports and prompting in the moment for kids with less language. With kids with a lot of language, we can do a lot of explaining how people think and feel when you act in certain ways. And we have to really think about generalizing skills. Just because I teach a kid how to join into play doesn't mean he's going to do it. And so to generalize skills, what I think about is 3 words: prime, coach, review. I have little cue cards that I get parents, teachers, and others to prime that youngster on what we want them to do before the situation, coach them in the moment, review afterwards. Prime, coach, review. And then it's not all about getting our kids to fit in. We also need to do some peer sensitivity training, meaning we've got to get other people to reach out. Okay? So it's a two-way street. Right? And so a lot of what we do in our schools and communities is creating peer buddy programs where typical peers will reach out to our kiddos. Last but not least is evaluating outcome. We have to have ways of measuring whether we're getting anywhere with social skills training by observing the particular behavior and rating it, or by creating rating scales that we often use for parents and teachers and others. So lots of things to think about here. Rather than go through the rest of this presentation, I want to stop, take some questions, let you know a lot of what I'm talking about is in this No More Meltdown book. It's on the bottom are all my social skill training books, manuals for teaching social skills, and picture books for those who learn better through picture format. There's a music CD as well that teaches social skills through song. And a couple of other books that came out recently, like the Overcoming Anxiety book, and a book for paraprofessionals. So let me stop and take some questions here. So folks, let me know. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Baker. We'll go through a few questions. The first one is, what do you recommend with regards to behavioral challenges caused by misperception or misunderstanding of what is being said or done?
Yeah, so I think it's common for our kids who have perspective-taking issues to misperceive, kids who might see someone staring at them and think that that person's teasing them. Here's the key, right? it's hard to teach a kid when they're the Incredible Hulk. So after the problem occurs, you might not get very far in that moment when they're really upset. They like, here's another, somebody bumps into them in the hallway. They think the kid did it on purpose. They don't understand that it was an accident, and they're just raging. And you may not be able to get very far with logic in that moment when they're the Incredible Hulk. But then later when they're calm, you can, without going back to the old problem that they may not want to hear about, you can prepare them for the next time this happens. Hey, sometimes people, when it's crowded in the hallway, might bump into you, and they don't do it on purpose. And then we try to teach kids about like intent. We might have a question like, Sally and John are helping their parents set the table. Sally has 10 plates, and she trips and falls, and all 10 plates fall. Johnny, on the other hand, was mad because he didn't get to use his computer. He was mad at Mom, so he broke one plate on purpose. He throws it on the floor. What do you think about this? And we talk about how Johnny maybe is more sort of responsible because he did it on purpose, where even though Alice broke more plates, it's not on purpose. And so we have to help them understand how intent has something to do with sort of holding someone responsible. Okay, but the time to do this is before the problem occurs, and then prime, coach, and review. That's how we generalize. That kid might have a cue card that the aide has, parent has, teacher has. And they say, oh, before you go in the hallway, remember somebody might bump into you, but that if it's crowded, it's because it's an accident. And here's how you can tell, because they weren't looking at you, or they said sorry afterwards, and so forth. So again, it's about preparing them ahead of time. So that's a little bit, there's more we can say if we had specifics about what that kid's misperceiving, but I just want to help them understand how to prepare and not necessarily, try to use logic in a moment when they're the Incredible Hulk.
Great, thank you. The next question is, what do you recommend when the behavior plan is no longer effective? So the examples that the individual gave was when rewards are no longer working or the triggers themselves have changed.
So when kids have challenging behaviors, it's usually not related to just one trigger. There's always a variety of things that might be triggering a kid who's more prone to upset. So the kid has trouble with mistakes, also has trouble losing a game. They also have trouble with writing assignments that are frustrating. And so we have to sort of understand that when we're looking at and tracking challenging behavior, we have to sort of look at all the categories of triggers that might be setting that kid up. And rewards, like we said, is part of traditional discipline. We reward good behavior, sometimes punish negative behavior, but that's not so effective when kids have repeat problems. That we have to do more to prevent the problem. So I remember having a situation the other day where a kid forgot to call home and was going to get punished because they went to some other event in school and they were going to get punished for it, or they're rewarded if they do check in with the mom. But if we only think about rewards and consequences, we're really not helping that kid have a system for remembering to check in with their mom. And so having an iPhone reminder that pops up, call mom, let her know what your after school schedule is, like that's more effective. And so rewards often do stop working if we haven't front-loaded the problem with ways to teach skills and modify the demands. There's no amount of rewards to do a writing assignment sometimes unless you've modified the writing assignment. So go back and look at that trigger and how to modify.
Okay. We have a question now from a parent, a high school practitioner, who asks whether you can recommend any strategies that are more appropriate for a high school setting.
Well, everything I talked about today is for every age, including adults, looking at those categories of triggers and how to prevent problems. But when you're talking about high school, one of the things we're thinking about is transitioning to adulthood at some point. So high school students really need to have good transition plans in place that really help them think about, first of all, some self-awareness. They need to understand themselves, their pattern of strengths and also challenges, because one of the number one predictors of success in transitioning out of high school is self-awareness. The kids who go off to college or a vocational setting knowing where they might need help do better than the kids who are blind to that and say, I've got this, no problem, and then they crash and burn. So often we work with our ninth graders in high school to really develop a really good understanding of their talents, their interests, and also where they might have some challenges, and as a result, what kinds of modifications or supports they might need, what kind of help they might need. And then they also need, in high school, some vocational testing, not only for their interests and abilities, but also like what settings might work for them. And so that they can then begin to pursue, sometimes in later grades, 10th, 11th grade, 11th, 12th grade, internships and job sampling opportunities. So they get real work experience while they're still in high school, because as we know, for a lot of our kids, when they hit 21 and school is officially over, there can be waiting lists sometimes in the adult service area to get employment services. So getting some of these employment skills in high school is really crucial. So we really need our high schools to do a very good job of creating employment or internship opportunities. And a good transition coordinator is a good salesperson who's made lots of connections with the community. So those are some of the things involved. I also would say, peer buddy programs can also be very helpful in the high school, but they often might occur after school, since scheduling can be so difficult in high school. A lot of high schools will have 40 minutes where staff is still available right after classes end, and that 40-minute period could be a time for a club. Lots of our kids feel stigmatized by going to social skills. If you have a robotics club or Magic the Gathering, Pokemon Go club, or some club related to special interest, that can be a real platform to learn social skills that doesn't feel so stigmatizing.
Thank you, Dr. Baker. We have a follow-up question related to this. So how do you work with teachers that are not as strong as implementing particular behavior plans or collecting data?
So I guess I'm going to make an assumption, but maybe I'm wrong in saying that they're talking about more regular ed teachers than special educators, but they might be talking about both. But the way I try to win over teachers is the same way I try to win over my clients, which is you got to tell them what they're doing well first, and you validate that what they're doing might work really well for some 70% of kids. Maybe it's a teacher who for years has had some really firm limits in their classroom and they're into traditional discipline and such, and we're saying, yeah, that works for like 70%. But for this other 30%, is it working for this kid? And if it's not, then we have to ask that big question, why is it happening for him or her? And how can we prevent the problem? And then lots of teachers are just saddled with so many demands that they can't even wrap their head around this behavior plan that you want them to do. So we tell them, I'm going to do it. Let me come into the classroom and I'll start it. And when you can demonstrate an improvement in that kid's behavior, then you might have a believer. So you can't just tell teachers what to do. You might have to do it for them, model it. They see the positive results, and then you might have a believer. When all that fails, then sometimes we go to the administration and say, I think this is a personality mismatch, and I'd like to switch my kid into another class. So
okay, thank you.
Yeah.
We actually had a couple questions come in from a number of listeners about very young children, so in preschool age. And there are situations where the child has a particular behavior issue and the parents or the educators have tried everything and nothing seems to work. So at that point, what's the next step?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because I haven't ever met a parent or a teacher who didn't say, I tried that and it didn't work. That is the nature of our business. I tried that and it didn't work. And the research that I was presenting early on this issue of hope and attributional style suggests we've got to look at that moment where we feel defeated and nothing's working and reinvigorate that hope by going to yet another interventionist who can tweak what we're doing, another expert in the field who can look at what's been done, see how we can tweak it until we get back into a positive direction. So I I would also say that, what works better in my book is not just rewards and consequences, but once again, looking at the triggers when you have challenging behaviors, modifying those triggers and teaching that kid skills. And by the way, it can take a year sometimes for a kid to learn to say, ask for help with a task, even in preschool, like cutting or pasting or tracing a letter rather than flipping a chair over. So it can take some time. And that's because Dr. Banner forebrain takes time to develop. That all kids, whether they're on the spectrum or not, have a pretty intact, incredible Hulk limbic system. And it takes time for that forebrain and problem-solving ability to develop. So we need to stay in that mode. But I would suggest they continue to go to the experts that are often highly recommended by parent advocacy groups. These are the people who know which interventionists in the area seem to do best by parents. So I would look at some of those local organizations and get those recommendations. Who's a good behavior specialist? Who's a good psychologist in the area, or BCBA, et cetera.
Great. We had another question, just to switch gears, about the use of medication in addressing mood and behavior. So what has been your experience as a clinician, and what does the research tell us?
Yeah, so there is no one medication for autism. Autism is lots of different things. There are medications for symptoms. And it shouldn't be our first choice. We really want our behavior planning to have an opportunity to work, if we can, to teach skills, to modify. But if you're in a crisis situation where a kid is getting kicked out of a setting, they are suicidal or homicidal, tremendous aggressive behavior or self-injurious behavior, or you have tried to do all these behavioral interventions and you're still stuck and haven't really progressed, medication can be a very effective tool. And it doesn't always have to be a lifelong tool, because like for anxiety issues, for example, sometimes medication can be something you use temporarily to get somebody to begin to face their fears on the fear ladder. Once they realize that nothing bad has happened, you can wean off the medication. But I really like what Temple Grandin has to say about medications. They ought to have a wow effect. You ought to be able to say, by collecting the right data, hey, this medication is really working. I see a difference on or off the medication, because you're always looking at pros and cons with medication. And if you're putting up with side effects, you want to at least have a wow positive effect. You don't want to be in a situation where everybody says, I don't know if it's working, and then you're still putting up with side effects. So you want to definitely see a positive effect if it's worth using. Okay.
Great, thank you. We have a bunch more questions, so we'll try and take a few more before we close today, and I'm trying to pick out ones that overlap with some other folks. This one's an interesting one. Most colleges and universities have disability centers, but my experience with them is limited. So I wonder if there are any specific higher ed institutions that are setting standards and creating best practices for how to help students with autism.
There are, and I don't think I'm in a position to list them, because there's new ones every day, and there are many that don't advertise, because if they advertise, they get swamped. But the way to do it is there are really good resources. You can even just Google, best disability supports, college disability supports for college students with autism. So I know some here in my local state, New Jersey, that have, in fact, we partnered with a university to provide supports for incoming students with high-functioning autism in a local private college here, where we do a pre-teaching module over the summer for incoming freshmen about what to expect in the classroom. Things like how to manage your questions and not, we have a lot of kids who might continually ask too many questions in a class and monopolize. We talk about dorm situations and issues of stalking, and so they're aware of what that might look like and how to handle maybe some of their interests in dating and such. Talk about some other peer issues that go on. And then we do a presentation for professors as well about how they can manage some issues that might come up in the classroom. And then during the year when they start in the fall, they have not only a social support group, but they have a peer mentoring program. And then they're assigned a case manager who can help them on a weekly basis with sort of executive control issues, the issues of sort of managing their time, managing deadlines and syllabus deadlines, advocating with professors. So they have these sort of weekly meetings with a case manager. So there are a lot of schools that do this kind of thing, but you got to just do your homework. It's online, it's there, and if you call the colleges, I have a 17-year-old son, and we're starting to look at colleges now, and I just call up the colleges and ask what they have, because I ask for my own son just in terms of interest in college, but then because of my profession, I'm always asking about their disability service. So there's always a disability specialist who will tell you what kinds of programs they have.
Thank you, Dr. Baker. If you're still with us, we'd like to do 2 more questions before we close today.
Yeah, sure.
The first one is related to a number of questions that came in, and that's how do we address challenging behaviors in teens and young adults without further increasing their aggressive behavior?
Yeah, so this is kind of what I'm talking. Pardon me?
Sorry. Or potential aggressive response.
Right. Well, this is exactly what I was talking about in the presentation, which is that we can escalate things when we start to get into power struggles, and just have a reward consequence approach with the Incredible Hulk. You punish the Incredible Hulk, and you can get more aggressive behavior. So the goal is, in the moment of out of control behavior, we're in crisis mode, and nothing works perfectly. We can try some form of distraction to get their mind off of it to calm. But the real goal is to figure out what triggered that individual to begin with, so you don't go down the same road, to understand of the triggers that I laid out, what might have been setting that kid off or that young adult off, and so how can we approach them differently so it's less likely to happen. Here's an example. I had a young man with limited language who was in we do a little summer program, and it was a little camp that we were running out of our office, and his grandmother came early to pick him up. He saw her out of the window, and he ran downstairs into the street to get her. And I was trying to prevent him from going in the street, but then we saw an escalation in the behavior. But I had to prevent him because he might have gotten run over, and he was going to hit me and yell at me, but finally Grandma came towards him, so we were able to get him out of the street. The real answer to that question was not to get into that situation again where I have to prevent him from getting in the street, but to talk to Grandma about coming at the regular time or putting it in a visual schedule so he knows exactly when he's going to see Grandma, and we show him the place where to meet Grandma, and then he's rewarded for that. And so that's the ultimate issue, right, is to prevent those problems.
Okay, and last question is about encouraging social skills in teens. So how do you promote a positive social skills or behavior in teens that may seem reluctant to do so or hesitant with hanging out with peers?
So most of the students I work with have some level of social anxiety. So we can teach them skills, but they might not use them because they fear rejection, because they have been rejected. They maybe accurately have sensed kids have not always been so responsive. So one of the things we're doing when we're trying to help our teens socialize is not only teach them the scripts and words to use to start conversation and join in, but to begin to challenge their expectation that they'll be rejected by creating a fear ladder, by picking kids that we know will be responsive and helping them see the difference between those kids and maybe kids in the past who might have been rejected. Right? So, and then begin to have them take some small steps. We also need to look at the activities that we're asking teens to do with each other, because if you are getting a kid to, join the football team, well, maybe that kid's not athletic and that's not going to work. What we could do instead is we look at that kid's interest and think about creating a club, if there isn't one already, around that kid's interest, like the robotics club, Pokemon Go club, and such. And then kids feel maybe less stigmatized to begin to relate to other students. Another thing we do sometimes is we do talk to typical peers so that they can take particular effort to reach out to some of our students, because some of our students, because of their anxiety, may be so inhibited to do it, but would respond better if a typical peer reached out to them and say, hey, come join this club, or come have lunch with us, or come be part of this group project with us. So sometimes we're focused on the typical peers initiation and not just our students' initiation. So that's a little bit of some things one can do.
All right, I think that's it for questions for today. Thank you so much, Jed, for an amazing presentation, and to everyone watching. You can access this webinar in a few weeks at sparkforautism.org, and you can also learn more about the SPARK study and join online at our website, sparkforautism.org. Stay tuned for upcoming SPARK webinars. On December 13th, Allison Singer, president of the Autism Science Foundation, Dr. Patricia Manning from the Kelly O'Leary Center for Autism Spectrum Disorders at Cincinnati Children's, and Ann Palmer of the Carolina Institute for Developmental Disabilities will join us for a discussion on partnering for autism. And during this webinar, we hope to share some ways in which you may partner from within the community to your benefit. We also have a 2-question survey that will automatically appear when you close your webinar window. And if you could take a few minutes to fill that out, it will help us to provide presentations that are of the greatest interest to you and to the whole SPARK community. Thank you again for joining, and goodbye.